Carper. Senator Inhofe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been sitting and listening with a lot of interest. Of course, I know this hearing is covering the forest fires, but we have prairie fires in Oklahoma. In fact, we had this, the last one we had was not really a record setter, but it's something that we are facing. I can remember flying my own plane over it and going all the way up to southern Kansas and seeing the carcasses of animals up against fences where they're trying to get loose. And so it's a very tragic thing. Ms. Crowder, in your testimony, you say outreach at the early stages of development in the NEPA process would be key to reducing the time it takes to reach a decision. You know, we have a lot of experience in that in this committee during our highway bills and everything else, and we have learned from experience that we could do that. Last week, I introduced a bill that pertains to the FERC permitting, providing for all federal, state, and local regulatory agencies to come to the table early to coordinate their participation. It sounds to me like this is needed across government for all other types of projects. Can you further detail as to why it's important to get all the stakeholders to the table early rather than later?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Senator Inhofe. I have extensive experience working on these National Environmental Policy Act processes and actually putting the documents together. And from my personal experience, those projects where the federal agencies engage state and local governments, as well as others, early in the process tend to move a lot faster. Mm-hmm. So for example, if a state agency has, and they often do, wildlife data that's important and useful for the federal agency, then that state agency can bring that wildlife data forward and instead of waiting until the last minute to provide that information.
Which is normally the case.
Often the case, yes, sir. And so I believe that bringing the entities to the table that have the data and expertise is of utmost importance.
Yeah, and I think we successfully did this in some of our FAST Acts and the previous transportation bill prior to that, and we got some things done that otherwise we would not have gotten done. And it was a joint effort, a very bipartisan effort, and very successful. Mr. Fite, in reading your, in hearing your testimony today, there seems to have been more of a system for forest practices at a more local level. Besides the NEPA process, the Forest Service and other agencies are constantly blocked from responsible forest management through litigation from environmental groups that challenge every decision, even when these decisions are backed by science and beneficial to the overall ecosystem. There is a problem that needs to be solved as these cases delay projects for years and create uncertainty. And then we will see situations like when the circuit court split and the Supreme Court doesn't weigh in. What are your thoughts? Now, you concentrated in your opening remarks more about S-605, but on the other bill that Senator Thune was interested in, S-1731, do you have any other thoughts on how you can solve these problems? Concentrate more on 1731?
Yes, Senator, and thank you for the question. Litigation is a real problem, particularly when you have a project like you were describing where stakeholders get involved, they're at the table helping develop the project, and then an outside group comes in at the very end and undoes the whole process, halts everything in litigation. And the arbitration provisions in 1731, I think are a good step at a pilot project for trying to figure out ways to streamline the litigation process. Mm-hmm. Because right now, the litigation process, on top of the planning process, can take years and years, and we need to fix that.
Well, that's good. You think that 1736 would help in that respect?
Yes, Senator.
The legislation we're discussing today are some ways to address forest management issues. Are there other things that Congress could do that are not addressed in this legislation? Anybody?
Well done.
Yes,
Senator, no, thank you. I would really
You're a very effective fast talker.
I know.
My wife is always telling me to talk slower, and I'm realizing now that there's a great benefit to talking faster. You got 10 minutes.
10 minutes into 5 minutes.
5 minute statement there.
I joke that I grew up in Syracuse, New York, and if you don't talk fast, your mouth actually freezes shut. So, yeah. I would encourage everyone to take a look at Senator Crapo's legislation on the funding side, because if we fix the funding side and there's sufficient resources for managers and we make some of these management improvements so they have more tools, then we actually could have a victory that would just transform forest management in this country. And frankly, it would be one of the most significant improvements in decades. So putting those two together, I think could be an absolute home run.
Oh, good, appreciate that. Any other comments on that, other things that could be done?
There are a number of measures that have been proposed on the House side in a bill sponsored by Congressman Westerman that can really streamline planning processes, in particular an action, no action analysis. So
Yeah.
and that can really streamline
that's interesting. We'll get that and look at those provisions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. By the way, this is just another reminder that we have a problem between two committees, this committee and the Commerce Committee, that always seem to meet at the same time. So one of these days we'll get that fixed.
Thank you, Senator Inhofe. Senator Mark.